All right, boys and girls. For the next few days, I wanted to introduce Frindle. I really fell in love with this book last year, and my babies last year enjoyed it. So I thought, hey, why not give it to my babies this year? All right, so obviously I'm gonna read two chapters like our normal routine, and then I'll post your comprehension questions on Google Classroom as well as your boom card assignment. All right, let's get started. Frindle. Chapter 1. Nick. I'm obviously going to have to make this a little smaller so you can see me. All right, I'll just move it over. If you ask the kids and the teacher at Leakin Elementary School to make 3 lists, all the really bad kids, all the really smart kids, and all the really good kids, Nick Allen would not be on any of them. Nick deserved a list of all on his own, and everyone knew it. Was Nick a troublemaker? Hard to say. One thing's for sure, Nick Allen had plenty of ideas, and he knew what to do with them. One time in 3rd grade, Nick decided to turn Miss Deaver's room into a tropical island. What kid in New Hampshire isn't ready for a little summer in February? So first, he got everyone to make small palm trees out of green and brown construction paper and taped them into the corner of each desk. Miss Deaver had only been a teacher for about 6 months, and she was delighted. That's so cute. The next day, all the girls wore paper flowers in their hair, and all the boys wore sunglasses and beach hats. Miss Dever clapped her hands and said, "It's so colorful." The day after that, Nick turned the classroom thermostat up to about 90 degrees with a little screwdriver he had brought from home. All the kids changed into shorts and t-shirts with no shoes. And when Miss Dever left the room for a minute, Nick spread about 10 cups of fine white sand all over the classroom floor. Miss Dever was surprised again at just how creative her students could be. But the sand got tracked out into the hallway, where Manny, the custodian, did not think it was creative at all. And he stomped right down to the office. The principal followed the trail of sand, and when she arrived, Miss Dever was teaching the hula to some kids near the front of the room. And a tall, thin, shirtless boy with chestnut hair was just spiking a Nerf volleyball over a net made from 6 t-shirts tied together. The 3rd grade trip to the South Seas ended suddenly, but that didn't stop Nick from trying to liven things up. Lincoln Elementary needed a good jolt once in a while, and Nick was just the guy to deliver it. About a year later, Nick made the great blackbird discovery. One night, he learned on a TV show that red-winged blackbirds give this high-pitched chirp with a hawk or some other danger comes near. When a hawk or some other danger comes near. Because of the way sound travels, the hunter birds can't tell where the high-pitched chirp is coming from. The next day during silent reading, Nick glanced at his teacher and he noticed that Mrs. Avery's nose was curved, kind of like kind of like the beak of a hawk. So Nick let out a high, squeaky blackbird. Beep! Miss Avery jerked her head up from her book and looked around. She couldn't tell who did it. So she said, "Shh," to the whole class. A minute later, Nick did it again, louder. Beep! This time, there was a little giggling from the class. But Miss Avery pretended not to hear the sound, and about 15 seconds later, she slowly stood up and walked to the back of the classroom. Without taking his eyes off his book and without moving at all, Nick put his heart and soul into the highest and most annoying chirp of all. Beep! Miss Avery pounced. "Janet Fisk, you stop that this instant." Janet, who was sitting 4 rows away from Nick, promptly turned white, then bright crimson. "But it wasn't me. Honest." There was a catch in Janet's voice, as if she might cry. Mrs. Avery knew she had made a mistake, and she apologized to Janet. "But someone is asking for big trouble," said Mrs. Avery, looking more like a hawk every second. Nick kept reading and he didn't make a peep. At lunchtime, Nick talked to Janet. He felt bad that Mrs. Avery had pounced on her. Janet lived in Nick's neighborhood and sometimes they played together. She was good at baseball, and she was better at soccer than most of the kids in the whole school. Boys or girls, Nick said. Hey, Janet, I'm sorry you got yelled at during reading. It was my fault. I was the one who made that sound. You did? Said Janet. But how come Mrs. Avery thought it was me? So Nick told her about the blackbirds, and Janet thought it was pretty interesting. Then she tried making a peep or two, and Janet's chirps were even higher and squeakier than Nick's. She promised to keep everything a secret. For the rest of Nick's fourth grade year, at least once a week, Miss Avery heard a loud beep from someone in her classroom. Sometimes it was high-pitched chirp, and sometimes it was very high-pitched chirp. Miss Avery never figured out who was making that sound, and gradually she trained herself to ignore it. But she still looked like a hawk. To Nick, the whole thing was just one long and stressful science experiment, and Janet Fisk enjoyed it too. All right, chapter 2, Mrs. Granger. Fifth grade was different. That was the year to get ready for middle school. Fifth grade meant passing classes. It meant no morning recess. It meant real letter grades on your report cards. But most of all, it meant Mrs. Granger. There were about 150 kids in fifth grade, and there were 7 fifth grade teachers, 2 math, 2 science, 2 social studies, but only 1 language arts teacher. In language arts, Miss Granger had a monopoly and a reputation. Miss Granger lived alone in a tidy little house in the older part of town. She drove an old pale blue car to school every morning. Rain or shine, snow or sleet, hail or wind, she had a perfect attendance record that stretched back farther than anyone could remember. Her hair was almost white, swept away from her face and up into something like a nest on the back of her head. Unlike some of the younger women teachers, she never wore pants to school. She had 2 skirt and jacket outfits, her gray uniform and her blue uniform, which she always wore over a white shirt with a little cameo pin at the neck. And Mrs. Granger was one of those people who never sweats. It had to be over 90 degrees before she even took off her jacket. She was small as teachers go. There were even some fifth graders who were taller, but Mrs. Granger seemed like a giant. It was her eyes that did it. They were dark gray, and she turned them on full power. They could make you feel like a speck of dust. Her eyes could twinkle and laugh too, and kids said she could crack really fun jokes. But it wasn't the jokes that made her famous. Everyone was sure that Mrs. Granger had x-ray vision. Don't even think about chewing a piece of gum within 50 feet of her. If you did, Mrs. Granger would see you and catch you and make you stick the gum onto a bright yellow index card. Then she would safety pin the card to the front of your shirt, and you'd have to wear it for the rest of the school day. After that, you had to take it home and have your mom or dad sign the card and bring it back to Mrs. Granger the next day. And it didn't matter to Mrs. Granger if you weren't in 5th grade, because the way she saw it, sooner or later, you would be. All the kids at Lincoln Elementary School knew that at the end of the line, 5th grade, Miss Granger would be the one grading their spelling tests and their reading tests. And worst of all, their vocabulary tests. Week after week, month after month, every language arts teacher in the world enjoys making kids use the dictionary. Check your spelling, check their definition, check those syllable breaks. But Mrs. Granger didn't just enjoy the dictionary, she loved the dictionary, almost worshipped it. Her weekly vocabulary list was 35 words long, sometimes longer. As if that wasn't bad enough, there was a word for the day on the blackboard every morning. If you gave yourself a day off and didn't write one day and look it up and learn the definition, sooner or later, Miss Granger would find out. And then just for you, there will be 2 words for the day for a whole week. All right, boys and girls, that's the end of chapter 1 and 2. I will add this on your Google Classroom, like I said earlier. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy it so far. I love you, and I bye.